So good afternoon, everyone. Sorry for the slight delay in letting you in. Technical hitch at my end, I'm afraid. So many apologies. Anyway, you're all very welcome. Another great topic for us to talk about, discuss in the next hour. So I hope you're going to be ready with your questions. I'll just wait for a few more people to come in before we do the official introductions and so on. So just give it a little bit longer if we can. Let's see where we're at. Yes, okay, that's looking good at the moment. We'll just give it another minute or two, Louise, if we may. Hello, Howard.
That's fine.
Good morning, all.
Howard, do you want to do the Slido or do you want me to do it?
It's up to you. I don't mind, Andrew.
Well, I just think a different voice makes it interesting, you know.
I'll do it then. No problem.
I'm sure we'll hear enough of Mr. Carpenter.
No. I'm a wallflower, Louise.
Oh, are you?
Really?
Look, I think we'll make a start and others can join us as we go along. So very good afternoon to you, ladies and gents. Thanks for joining us again for our regular Friday 12 o'clock webinars. Do you know we're nearly 2 years old, Howard? It's nearly 2 years. Do you think we'll have a party in a fortnight's time? That's our second birthday. You see, we started, as you know, during lockdown, and here we are 2 years on, still providing valuable webinars. So thank you for joining us. For those that don't know me, I'm Andrew Carpenter. I'm Chief Executive of the Structural Timber Association. I'm also Chief Executive of CE in the Southwest and the Midlands. And as hosts, we're joined by the rest of the CE family that you can see on the screen around the UK, together with the CIOB in the Southwest. So a whole plethora of organizations bringing you these Friday lunchtime webinars now. Delighted that Louise could be with us today, Louise Lado-Burns. I'll introduce Louise in a while. Louise and I go back a few years, I think it's true to say, thanks to Latham and Egan. But more of that later. Right now, I'm going to hand over to my good friend, Howard, who's going to take us through the Slido rules and regs for today. Thank you, Howard.
Thank you very much, Andrew. Yep. Good afternoon to everyone. So for those of you unfamiliar, you can go into Slido, which we're going to use today in 3 ways, by going to the QR code on the right-hand side of the screen, or you can simply go to slido.com and enter today's code, which is LM110322, which is today's date. So the 3 ways we're going to use it today is we're going to have a poll in a minute, and I will run through the questions with you. If you have questions during today's session, you can type those in to the Q&A on Slido. If you like a question you see, you can vote for that, which means that question will come further up the list or even to the top of the list. And lastly, right at the end, we will remind you, but we would appreciate your feedback on today's session. So let's hope everyone's there. I can see some people are probably already into the poll as they're used to it, but let's take the first question. So the first one is, have you heard of insurance-backed alliancing, otherwise known as ABA? So you can type in there, yes, no, or any other combination thereof. So 2 people have already completed the whole questionnaire. So let's carry on, Abraham. What do you think the key benefits are? So if you don't know, it could be that you're interested here to discover. So I'll leave you to put that in. The third question is, do you perceive it as competitive in price and time? So if you haven't heard of it, maybe you're here to hear of that. The next question, do you think it is more or less risky? And the last question, when do you think you should consider IBA? When it is too late?
Yes, I misread that one as well. It's when is it too late?
Right. When is it too late? Right.
That's okay. 2 questions in one. 2 for the price of 1, Louise. When do you think you should consider it, and when is it too late?
Yeah.
Okay, what we'll do, Andrew, when do you want to take the results of this? Afterwards?
What we're going to do, we're going to run the questions again, at the end of Louise's presentation, and we're going to see if that's moved people's opinions. And I think then what we'd like to do, if it's possible, Abraham, is compare one with the other. I think that was the idea, Louise, wasn't it?
Well, if it's doable, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, so folks, please go to Slido and answer those questions as we go through. So Louise, as I say, thank you so much for giving up of your valuable time to be with us today. I know a lot about, obviously, what you're going to talk about through our 20-year connection, probably with constructing excellence, and really this is part, as far as I'm concerned, of a suite of solutions to delivering the collaborative culture that we've been seeking to do in the last 24 years since the Rethinking Construction report. We've seen it in action as part of the Constructing Excellence Awards over a number of years. And I know your work, particularly with Dudley College, has won several CE awards, which indicates the success of what you're proposing. In fact, I know, having been with you, in January, you won another award for the work you've done in the Midlands this last 12 months. So there's a whole plethora of best practice example of where this works. And I think what we've got to do in CE is give it a greater platform so that more people can actually understand it and then utilize it.
Brilliant.
Louise, I'm not going to do too much more of an intro because I think it's probably best if you do that, and I'm sure that'll be part of your presentation. But we're over to you, and then at the end we'll have Q&A and a bit of a chat. So I'm gonna mute myself and turn off my video. You'll be pleased to know, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everybody. It's very strange doing webinars for those of you that don't do them because you can't actually see your audience. But I think there are 23 of us at the moment, so that's very good. I have to tell you that when I talk about insurance-backed alliancing and the IPI model, I never know who knows what in the audience. So what I've decided to do today, and I apologise in advance, is talk it to you all at 100 miles an hour, introducing the high-level thought process and basics of what insurance-backed alliancing actually is, and then talking about how it delivers. For those of you who are interested, I've got a degree in construction management and design, and I spent half my career as a main contractor and was on the board of delivering for Balfour Beatty and Burse, and then latterly been in the consultancy world, working with Sir Michael Latham and talking about collaborative working for the last 20 years. So I have a dent in my forehead where I'm hitting the proverbial brick wall, but some of us just carry on and so on and so forth. So forgive me, I'm going to talk through this very, very quickly, and then I'm going to go on to how it delivers. So we've all heard of them, and Andrew mentioned actually prior to this, we had Latham and Eakin in the mid-90s. And these are all report after report after report that tell us we're doing it all very poorly, that there's a race to the bottom, that we should, we should be procuring for value, we should do things very differently. And what my last team has done is examine that in a little bit more detail. So the construction playbook and the constructing gold standard. So IPI has been in the government construction strategy since 2011. And we were looking for trial projects at that time. We still sit in the government construction strategy. So perhaps later when we do Q&A, we'll question why it hasn't actually sort of trickled out any further than it has. So this is how I see the construction industry. And all of us who do any construction, and I'm going to caveat everything I say today by saying I completely acknowledge there are some really good frameworks and some really good D&B projects out there. I'm not slagging everything off in the industry, but you'll hear me do a comparator with traditional to IPI just to illustrate key differences. So this is something we all recognise, that the ability to change and the cost to change on a project sort of goes to a point where it becomes more costly to change and more difficult. And what I would also say is, if you can see my cursor, I hope you can. If not, if you look at that detailed design area, that's pretty much where most 1 and 2 stage D&Bs come in. So you sort of have the design team up front working with the client to get a spec and an output and something that we can base that bid on. And then you have the delivery team thereafter. And what we all talk about is this early contractor involvement and so on and so forth. So we try and do that, but we're sort of barred. And we sat down and thought, you know, what's stopping us? What really is stopping us? And there's a lot. Contracts themselves, we have service contracts and delivery contracts separately. We have different insurances, which we'll focus on a fair bit because it's in the title, insurance-backed alliancing. Procurement regulations, you have to have a cost element in there. I know OJU is sort of disappearing and there's new white and green papers out there now. Really established procedures. A lot of clients and a lot of people we talk to go, oh, but normally we do this. And you're looking at them, and I've got one going on at the moment with a government body who are trying to do it differently, but it's like ingrained in their brains to do it the way they've always done it. That always reminds one of Einstein, doesn't it? Advisors and auditors, they're very used to being the client's right-hand person. They're covering the client's back. They're fighting the client's corner all the time. And again, lots of custom and practice out there. We've also got this fantastic separation of insurances. So PI insurance, and we all know those are any designers on the call today. PI is a nightmare at the moment. And then we've got this separation. And I always find that clients they assume that insurances are for them because it gives them someone to sue, effectively in my book. And insurances basically are for the person who holds the insurance policy, a bit like the car crash mentality. You get out the car, you don't claim responsibility and you back off and let them sort it out. And we have so much waste in our industry from forensic and legal costs in pursuing claims. It's actually sinful if you actually look at the levels that sits at. So what we did was we said, right, how can we do something differently? And I'll come on to this in a little bit more detail. How do we actually get that to happen? So we looked at how we could do that. And we thought, well, if we insure everyone the same way and everyone on a project the same way, perhaps we can negate that difference, that car crash mentality of insurances. So we've got this fragmentation. We've also got this disconnect, and we do lots of feedback. We've delivered we finished 2 trial projects at the end of the pandemic last year, and they were both on time and budget. In fact, one of them was under budget and under time. So it can be done, but we always run feedback sessions at the beginning, during, and end of each project. So what were your expectations? Were they met? What can we do better? There's no point in being in trial project mode and doing case studies if you don't learn from them. And one of the things that we were saying was that suppliers and contractors, we call them constructors in the project, in our contract, they want to know what the end user wants. They want to be in touch with the client so they know they're delivering the right thing. We all know about margins. We all know about the race to the bottom. And value, value engineering has become quite a bastardized term in my view. It's usually used to cheapen the project after the bid's gone in because nobody can afford that price they've put in. Massive disconnect between CapEx and life cycle. And I know we've got net zero and Let's See and the RIBA targets for 2030, all those things. But one of the things that struck me very recently, listening to clients who say, we don't do IBA, no, it's too expensive, it's too risky, it's too this. What I look at, I also went down a route of doing behavioural science, and I do I'm qualified practitioner in lots of different psychometric profiling tools and coaching. And what struck me when I was in a room one day doing a sort of behavioural exercise with someone in the industry, we have a lot of what I would call blues and greens. If you do insights, they're the theorists, they're the reflectors, they're the people that want proof that something will work before they dive in. They're the people who like spreadsheets. Some of us on the other end of the scale will dive in and try something new, because if you don't try something new, you won't learn and get better. So behaviours are massive for me. So if I stuck you all in a darkened room, and I have done with many teams, what solutions would you come up with to really change the industry? And that's pretty much what we did at IPI. We said what we really want is not this Chinese whispers. So my view of the industry is it's still too much like Chinese whispers. And I don't know if any of you know the old World War One syndrome, where the front lines say send reinforcements, we're going to advance. And by the time it gets back to HQ, it's send reinforcements, we're going to advance. And that to me is like the industry. So the client has this need that sits up here, and the supply chain, the specialists that actually deliver that project, who've got that knowledge, are completely remote from the client. So we want to get the message to the whole team at the same time once. We want to procure the exact team of specialists required to produce the product we need. Now, sometimes that might include very unusual things. For example, on Derby Silk Mill, we had the exhibition designers and the storytellers in the room. If we are doing a big infrastructure construction project, we would probably need that infrastructure specialist in the room. We tend to run the project as a business with all parties having a vested interest. So if you see the project as a business, it has a board of directors, which I'll come on to, represented by each discipline. Here's a biggie. And funnily enough, on LinkedIn this morning, I was seeing lots of complaints about supply chains going bankrupt off the back of Midas's demise and other things like this. Pay everyone at the same time for what they do. Don't actually have this third party. Why go through a main contractor? Why not pay everyone at once? Project bank accounts, incidentally, aren't as easy to get hold of as people think, but we can still do trust accounts and similar. Design and deliver everything once only. I'll give you an example in a few minutes of what I mean by that, because if you have a group of designers in the room, particularly architects, and you say, how often did you redesign the building? They initially look a bit puzzled. And then you say, how often have you redesigned the cladding and the curtain walling and the roofing details? Well, of course, they're redesigning it each time a new supplier comes on board. And we have this awful habit of procuring people we need to influence the design in line with the construction project. So as a structural engineer, I want to know what's going on the roof, but I probably only get my plant room procured halfway through the project. Achieve commercial certainty. Manage the project by managing risk as a whole team. Those of you who are main contractors will know the adage, it's not design and build, it's design and dump. The risk is constantly pushed onto a main contractor. The main contractor is driven to put in low bids to win the work, and then they're in this constant situation of passing that risk on to the supply chain. We need BIM and CDEs to manage design solutions and information. And for those of you that do know me, I had a platform at Digital at Future Build last week, which I'll talk about in a few minutes. And I'm not your IT BIM CDE person, but I now realise I've been spoilt on IPI projects for the last 3 years, and I'll articulate that in a while. So that's the sort of thing we were trying to overcome. So how do we do it? Well, we do it by having one multi-party contract. We tried to use current industry contracts, but they constantly wanted us to have someone in charge. They constantly wanted us to have clauses that allowed claims and subrogation. And actually, to be truly collaborative, you need to negate that. We do invite the whole supply chain to the party. Our alliances are generally formed of constructors, designers, and those constructors can be specialists as well. So the MEP are always there. And as I say, depending on the actual project, you might have a specialist, a cladder, roofer, exhibition designer, whatever it might be. So I've described this already, a virtual business with a board of experts. So we run that like a proper business. So we have the board, and then we have what we call the IPT, the Integrated Project Team. Just treat them like a senior management team, if you like. They do all the work, they deliver, they make the key decisions. Open book. In our contract, and I haven't got time to go into it in detail here, we pay for people and things separately. What this does is eliminates the waste of over-resourcing. So between that board of experts, we actually work out what resource we need to do the job, and sometimes that resource sits somewhere where you don't consider it should be. Don't start the design until the fundamentals of the solution are agreed. If you go back to that cost to change and ability to change curve, when you've got a blank sheet of paper, my goodness, it's so much easier to be innovative and come up with different solutions. We, as a matter of course, in the contract, we appoint independent experts as part of the process, and I think one of them might be sitting on the call here today. That's important because because of the insurance policy we have, the insurers are looking for that security. And also because we're doing something radically new and it's all about behaviours, we need an independent facilitator built in. And we knew if we didn't write it into the contract, is the first sort of thing people decide they don't need. And that's really important that they're there. We have everyone inputting from day one. And importantly, and I'll come on to it again in a little minute, we choose the team for their ability to, and we measure their behaviours. So we really select on ability to do the job we're asking you to do and the behaviours that you display in trying to be collaborative. We test that in a behavioural workshop. So going back, making sure the client gets their desired outcome within the cost and time they have to invest. And that sounds such a simple thing to say, doesn't it? But as an industry, we're still reported as being 40% over time and cost on a regular basis across a huge percentage of the industry. And I think that's because of the way the industry is set up, that the client goes out, gets a design, they're sold a, not always, but they're sold a Rolls Royce that they can't really afford, but it's very difficult to lose that vision once it's there, isn't it? And then it goes out to tender, be it 1 stage, 2 stage, whatever, and you do have some involvement, but you've already got that fixed solution in your head, and often it's a solution that clients can't afford. So what we do under the model, and I'm whizzing through this now, is we have an alignment phase, which is about cultural and commercial alignment, and the alliance contract pulls that together. It's a live contract, I'll come on to that in a moment, and let's have a look at the insurance. So because we all sign into the same contract and because we don't select on price, we don't know what the building, we've got an investment target, but we don't know what all the makeup of that price is, because that's what we work together to achieve. And it sounds fundamentally simple, but instead of saying there's a design, how much does it cost, we say here's the time and money that the client's got to spend, what can they have for that money? And it puts a completely different emphasis on the way things are designed. So we actually procure the whole team, and I mean we design the architects, the engineers, the MEP contractors, everyone on exactly the same documentation during exactly the same process. One of the things that's come out of all the feedback we've got is the flexibility and adaptability it gives you having the no blame culture. And we've all heard of no blame culture, but every contract, when it gets into difficulty, everyone reaches for the bottom drawer. In the alliance contract, there is no right to subrogation other than some very sort of fraudulent type events. So it allows the team to maneuver easily. And I think that's why we managed to finish 2 projects and on time and on budget in the pandemic, is because the team were able to flex and respond very, very quickly. So these 3 independent experts, you'll hear acronyms when you hear about IPI. So there's a FIRA, a financial independent risk assurer, and a TIRA, a technical independent risk assurer. And they're to do due diligence. Once the solution's been agreed, they are checking it on a monthly basis. They're sitting with the board and reviewing it. The independent facilitator is there to maintain that culture, and actually half the time to remind people that they don't need to behave the way they normally did. I often tell a war story here on our first IPI project where all the time we're telling them they're writing these emails and they're trying to, why do we write minutes? We write minutes for legal purposes. We don't need them in IPI. We have Trello boards, we manage things differently. We have decisions logs and questions and so on and so forth. And when we started our first project, it was myself and my partner Kevin who were constantly telling the team they didn't need to ask that question, they didn't need to do this, they didn't need to do that. And what was great about 4 or 5 months in was one of the MEP contracts managers wrote one of those emails that a lot of us recognise, which is, if I don't get this information by this date on this time as we agreed, then this will happen. And of course it won't happen. So what was great for us was that after 5 months of drumming it into them, 5 members of the team responded as opposed to us. And that's when you know you're making progress. So what does the insurance look like? So this is what we're all used to. This is this separation of insurances, construction all risk third party, and then tied into that, you've got your latent defects, and we all know how difficult PI is at the moment. So what we did is we tried to think of it differently. We thought if we underlie it by proper behaviours, a proper contract that really is collaborative, Can we look at it differently? So we added in a cost overrun insurance, and that actually covers every single person, every supplier, every designer, every constructor that works and specialist that works on that contract. Normally at this point, I do lots of diagrams about gain pains and incentives and how it works. But effectively, what we do is instead of showing inputs, we basically, with the cost overrun and 12-year latent defects policy, we ensure outputs. And the massive difference that makes is we don't need PI on the project. For those of you who are thinking, gosh, how does that work? We could spend another hour on it. But effectively, what it does is it releases the team to be innovative, not to hold back, to put into one federated model, et cetera, from day one. We also have this terminology that people get very worried about, and insurers particularly balk when you say it. So fit for defined purpose. Now, notice we say defined. So in order to deliver the project, the client writes a strategic output brief, and then they prioritize their success criteria. And I'll give you some examples in a few minutes as to how that works and what that's actually meant has happened on our projects. So the team will actually decide what the acceptance criteria are. So when we get to the end of the project, they can tick them off and they can say it is fit for the defined purpose. An IPI team looks something like this, with the project and the project needs sitting in the middle. Some of you will see that the client sits in the alliance, and that might sound counterintuitive, but most of our clients absolutely love that, insofar as they're being done with and not to. And what they can do when problems arise, and it's construction, and they will, and IPI is actually really suited to complex projects. The client is in the room and we can say, look, we've got a problem. Obviously, in the last year, we had, by the end of our project in Dudley, we had hardwood that had tripled plus in price during the course of the contract. So we look at what's most important to the client with the success criteria, and that's what we deliver. This is a flow chart of how IPI works. Again, so one of the questions I noted was, when is it too late? It's too late if the client's already had the design done. They need to be approaching people to do IBA right up front, right when they're thinking of the project. We do appreciate that outline planning and all sorts of things will hinder that, and we can run with that. But what we've got to do is give the team the chance to actually come up with better solutions. If you look at the project I'm going to describe later, it started in outline planning as two separate buildings, and it ended up as a T-shaped building where we used the fabric of the building to amend and improve the ventilation, the acoustics, etc. For those of you who don't like very detailed flow charts, I've got one that I do for myself, in effect. If you look at this, so we're in there with tender and bid support because people aren't used to procuring IPI projects. They need our help. They need to know what's different. Behavioural workshops for a lot of them are quite new and different and scary because are they too subjective, etc. But I've been running behavioural workshops as part of the selection process since the late 90s with some of the highways teams and Network Rail and people like that. So, you know, it's part and parcel nowadays. We then do this cultural and commercial alignment, and see these stars at the top. You see their contract award. We sign the contract before we do anything. And we can do that because it's a live contract and there are commercial data and annexes that change as we go. So we go through various phases. Phase one is where we develop the solution, and phase two is where we complete the detailed design. You'd think in this day and age, wouldn't you, that we'd all got past the point of wanting to get a spade in the ground, but trust me, holding contractors and constructors back to get that spade in the ground is difficult. And we could almost describe it as more of a Japanese way of thinking. We do a lot more planning and we hopefully get that right. So we would probably put a spade in the ground, as you see here, sort of part way into phase two, because the first part of phase two, when the policy is incepted and the target cost is agreed by the board, is when we have the detailed design in and we work with the suppliers to get the best design. We then go into phase three, where there's a budget set aside for standard defects, 12 months, and then we're into a 12-year latent defects policy. So that's IPI in a nutshell. That's as much as you're going to get on that subject. And I'm now going to talk about some of the things that annoy me. actually. Our industry is really good, and Andrew mentioned it up front. You know, we've got Latham and Egan back in the mid-90s telling us to work better as teams, do lean construction, cut out waste, don't do lowest cost bidding, and yet we still seem to perpetuate it. We just carry on doing the same thing over and over again and expecting it to perform differently. So we had a good look at the playbook, which seemed to be the sort of the big one, the one that covered it all, the one that said these are all the things that we want to do. So I'm talking and I'm hoping you're reading the screen rather than me read it out to you. But they're basically saying, yeah, they mention frameworks, they do mention alliancing, but frameworks get a little bit more attention because obviously they're a mechanism for many clients to use. I was party to the debate that David Mosley did when he launched the Gold Standard Framework Day, and I found it really interesting that he had contractors sitting up on the panel saying that it costs them a fortune. It costs them to get into the framework, then they have mini tendering and mini bids, and then the actual projection of workload isn't as big as they said it was going to be, etc., etc. So it's absolutely slated in some ways. Now, there are some really good frameworks out there, but an alliance is just as actually effective, if not more so, and we'll talk about that. So do design and build and other existing contracts deliver all of the things that are in the playbook? I can sit here and say lots of things. I've actually spent some time, as have IP initiatives, in looking at this and sort of deciding how to do it. And we kind of come back to this diagram here, where we're still prohibited, even within frameworks, from getting this. We get it better, but we still have the same contracts. We're still using JCT, NEC, PPC 2000 contracts, which do some good things with NEC 4, for example, but still you've got that top dog, still you've got that one person that can bang the table and make the decision on behalf of everyone. And the risk still sits in very similar pots. Some try and spread it a bit better, but still very similar. So all of those things that stop us working together still exist. So what we did is we mapped out the playbook, and let me jump to another screen if you bear with me here for a moment. Can you all see that? We looked at what the playbook, and we tied it in with lots of the other reports, Procuring for Value, the McKinsey reports, all of those reports that come out, Mark Farmer's report, obviously Big C supporter and IPI supporter. And we looked at what the playbook said. So they're leading us towards this list here. I'm not going to read this list out to you. You can see it for yourself. So we then looked at the outcomes across the top right here that the playbook was looking for, as based on those chapters. And we looked at what IPI actually does. And what was most interesting is that the seasonal commissioning isn't really, so the life cycle, that sort of end user bit, is not really heavily looked at in the playbook. And what we've done here, and we will launch this in the next week or so for people to have a good look through, is that we then looked at the IBA processes and compared them to what the playbook was demanding. And what we've done then, for those of you who really want all the detail, each of these ticks is where IBA actually achieves exactly what the playbook set out to achieve. And obviously IBA existed long before the playbook was written. So it was interesting to us that we just seem to get report after report after report, and we get very, very little of the how-to. So what we wanted to do when we finished our last project is we wanted to say, okay, we're practitioners. I'm not an academic. I didn't sit and write that alliance contract. I've contributed to it over the years with all the feedback and the day-to-day usage. I'm a practitioner. I don't particularly want to read 135 pages of what's wrong with frameworks. What I want to know is how to put them right. What I want to know is what best practice dictates, what's out there that actually delivers all these things for us. So we put a lot of work and thought into doing this. And then when we got to the end of our last project, which is at the Institute of Transformational Technologies at Dudley College, which is a new batch of government funding and it hadn't been done before. Lots of medical sciences, not training the medics at university level, but training people to mend the equipment that the medics have. So here's how. So what the team did at the end of Dudley, and we produced a prospectus of our first project, which is sitting on our website, and CE is the website as well. And the team wanted something that was that a practitioner, someone who actually delivers, would pick up and be interested in. So this for me is the how-to, and it's turning in the playbook into the reality, and it's actually evidencing how and where it's done that. And actually this wasn't written by IP initiatives, this was written by this team here, this was written by the Alliance off the back. So what I'm just going to do now, and looks a little bit messy, but bear with me. What I'm going to do now is just run through some of the real high-level feedback and information we got from that team. So we all talk about early contractor involvement. This photo here is an early workshop on an IPI project. And if you look carefully, well, I know them obviously, we've got everyone in that room from architects, engineers, MEP engineers, cost managers, designers, and one supplier specialist. And the site team, the deliverers. And we can have them in that room straight away before the design is really complete, as we said. We've also, I've just put this slide up more as a reminder to me, ESG is massive, and we've got a few funders at the moment who are saying, unless you meet our ESG requirements, you know, we might not even fund your project. And that would be really interesting for IPI, because we know that we can deliver on these different things. So this is really sort of a bit of a story that I've taken excerpts out of that report that we've just produced, this how-to book, if you like. And we looked at the RIBA climate change, which people have signed up to in the LETI agreements and so on and so forth. And they came out partway through the project. So we asked the architect at the end, you know, how do we keep these in going forward? And I think a lot of you might recognise that some of the stuff that gets, let's call it, value engineered out is due to cost, comes in after the project's been handed over. And actually sometimes the client and or the designer loses some fundamental points that actually deliver the low cost net zero and sustainability and life cycle costing that we all need. So the BREEAM criteria, you can read this, is a case in point, you know, to get that excellent level or very good or excellent, it's a point-based system, and actually sometimes some of that is really not adding to the value of the building. So we had a bit of a joke on the last one, and I perhaps shouldn't say it, but I will, is that the architect went around the site and counted the number of bicycle sheds on the campus, and actually there were pretty much, you know, 20 cycle sheds, and there were probably about the equivalent number of bikes in those sheds. Now I know that's different in some areas if you go into Oxford or Cambridge or a big university town, but they were point scoring for BREEAM. So we need to be able to specify up front what we need, and that's what the architect is saying here. So what we did as well, we measured, this is in the report as well, you know, at the time, as I say, those two targets weren't set, but we've measured the Black Country Marches IoT here, and you can see that, well, we're ahead in 2 of the 3 areas, or pretty close to getting the 2025 targets and the 2030 targets. What we were able to do, because we have that collaborative approach and no right to subrogation, nobody needs to take blame. We can go down a few blind alleys and back out. We can be flexible and change the way we think. We can direct spend and value to some of the areas that are really important to the client, and then perhaps give in a couple of other areas. One of the problems we have with indices and BCIS indices across the place is that they're very prescriptive. And if you have a client, which we did here, that was spending DFE money, they want it spent in very particular ways. And we actually had to change the DFE monitor that could see a new way of doing something. So where we overspent on one element, they wanted to take that money off the budget given. And it took us a few months, but eventually we got there and they understood it. And actually, there was a DFE monitor in every senior management and board meeting throughout the whole project. The MEP constructor, one of the things that's come out for me, and I'll be honest, I thought it would be good, but it's much better than even I thought. This is the MEP constructors comment in that report. And what's absolutely fantastic here is that there's sort of mental health benefits, and it was stated by the architects on the Silk Mill project as well. It's a massive plus. So all those stresses and strains that one takes home, particularly if you're a cost manager or a design manager, or the project's going in the wrong direction, you've got a whole team that's supporting you and helping you, and there are no finger points. It does actually just allow you to move on. So these are just some of the things that people said. This is our feedback session. This is our end of project feedback session. And one of the things for me was that, and it speaks volumes, everyone who's ever done an IPI project wants to do another one. Sadly for us, we don't have the projects to give them at the moment, and we'd really like to be getting more and more people on IPI projects. So we need the help of people like you to get clients to look at the approach properly and differently. So these are absolute word for word, and you'll see some of them are going left. There's room for improvement. Yes, absolutely there is. But most people, as you can see, just absolutely loved it. And to go away from the industry, and actually it was my son who actually, Andrew, did the interview for people development on one of the awards. He said, it's all well and good measuring apprentices and young people coming into the industry. He said, but I've interviewed the whole team here on this IPI project, and hardened construction professionals, project managers with 20, 30 years in experience have changed. And surely that's a massive mark of what this process does. So governance, again, we're coming back to the fact that we can do different things if we don't put every rigid piece of governance, every ISO that we don't need to achieve, that we've not, without PI, we can actually look at leaner, fitter solutions in engineering and so on and so forth. But I think the comment on the right, on the left there, vanishingly rare, I like that, to have chosen contractor fully engaged. And it made such a difference. And, you know, things like this. My favourite aspect here was when the architectural board member, towards the end of the project, because we run the whole project on opportunity and risk, and what I don't think I said was every person on that project owns the design, every person on that project owns the cost, every person on that project owns the delivery and the programme. So when something goes wrong in one area, there's a whole team of people stepping in. And obviously the incentivization on the project pushes people to react quickly and make good decisions. I put this in here because my favourite moment, when the board were discussing whether or not they should spend, you know, 10 grand on doing this or doing that, the architect was the person who picked the cost plan up and went, I've just done a ready reckoner on the opportunity and the risk, and we're spending more money discussing this than we are in its solution. Just pay for it and get it done. And that's the sort of thing that comes out when you work this way. This was, again, you know, people say there's a lot of meetings with IPI. Yes, there are, but when you're not in that meeting, that gem is missed. And this one was massive. So, you know, we were over budget 2019. We had to get the budget down. And the contractor said, well, if you make the yard 5 meters bigger, I can get low loaders in and we don't need a tower crane. The architect would never have thought of that. Acoustic solutions, I could talk about that. We changed the building, we used the building itself as part of the acoustic solution and part of the ventilation. The constructors, bearing in mind we delivered this through a pandemic, and there was certainly a period where they felt under supported on site. I think the last sentence here, I'm content that it's, you know, I wonder what we could have achieved. That project came in a month early, and I think it was about £280,000 under the target cost, so people got gain share. Digital. Now, I'm not a digital expert, but you see here they call IPI and technology as extreme collaboration and not for the faint-hearted. And I often say that when I talk, you know, we talk about the industry, about collaboration. Just because we've all shaken hands, we think that's it, we're going to work really well together. And that's where I think some frameworks fail for me, is they think because they set up all these processes that people will just behave differently. And actually it's bloody hard work to get a good collaborative project. And trust me, I've done 3 ever since 2014, and it is. For those of you who are interested, these are, and I realised when I delivered at Future Build last week that I've been spoilt. It is second nature to me, even though I'm not an IT geek, that all of these systems are in place, that we have a 360-degree camera, we have Matterport, we have Revitstu, we have everything we need. We used Zoom and Teams before COVID set in because we wanted to be efficient and not travel. So this just shows the magnitude of tools that we had at our disposal and everyone used. So oops, that's not moving on. Just some examples here. There's a very happy team doing the 360-degree camera runs. On the right there, you've got the virtual prototype, the digital twin all going on. I think the one that I'm most enlightened by and where I've seen huge differences is when we do the one that's in the bottom middle, which is a 4D workshop, where you literally have the program running through, the model building up, you have all the suppliers in the room, and one of them says, why is it pausing for 10 seconds? So we go back and we have another look, and we realize that we're putting some very extensive scaffold up over a roof because we've put the frame up. And he said, why don't you just leave the frame down and we'll use cherry pickers? That will save us 2 weeks and, you know, £50,000. And you don't get that unless you put people in that situation and make them feel comfortable with digital technology. So I'm always asked the question, and I noticed intriguingly that the questions you were asked up front were of this ilk. I don't think risk management, why, if it's so good and it delivers, why aren't more people doing it? And I think there are lots of reasons for that. I don't think risk management is understood. I think some clients prefer to be remote from that risk, and they see a lowest cost bid of a way of getting a project in, and they'll have the fight at the end if they have to, but they'll probably mostly leave that to the main contractors. And as an ex-contractor, and there'll be a few of you smiling here, we used to call it design and dump, not design and build. And I think it's very much still the same. The only aspect of our industry that's massively changed since I started is probably health and safety, taking digital out of the equation. And that's because there was a legal mandate to do so, and we threatened to lock directors up, basically, didn't we? Reticence to recommend. There are a few people in the industry, and I know there's a couple of you online that support IPI, but we found commonality when we've gone to certain clients who've got really good potential IPI projects, and they say, no, we don't do IPI, it's too risky. But also, you know, we're often asked when going to the end, it's more expensive, there's an IPI fee, there's an IPI insurance. Yeah, but there's no employer's agent fee, there's no PQS fee. And actually, when we look at the BCIS figures, which you can do in the report I'll point you to, we've come in under standard BCIS figures on IPI projects, and normally those BCIS figures exclude some design fees and exclude some employer's agent fees. And we're coming in under them without those fees being added on separately. So you can draw your own conclusions there. We have a bit of a sweet spot. IPI becomes inefficient under 10 million. And we know loads and loads and loads of people want us to do it. So you'll see in brackets there, we are looking at doing an IPI light and seeing how that might work. We're often brought in too late. You see right at the beginning, we need to be in the advisory team. We need to help with procurement. We need to get that strategic brief and success criteria set. So we don't go down standard prescriptive and cost routes. It's not for everyone. We started off wanting to change the whole world and the whole industry, and actually we can't. So what we need are the 20 to 30% of the industry, like the people probably sitting listening to me now, who really want to do things differently. I'm going to leave it there, other than to say, so our message to government at large and construction industry is, can we stop producing lengthy reports? I think the last one, gold standard, was 140 pages, telling us what's wrong. Can we actually start using things that are radical and different and deliver the change? And what we're saying is, we've checked it all, we've done it all, we've proved it. IPI does it. It does what it says on the tin, as I said at one of the award ceremonies. So further message from me, how about government actually investing in change instead of talking about it? I'm going to leave it there. I hope that's given you a kind of massive overview of where IPI sits and what we're doing. What I can do is just quickly reshare my screen again, sorry. So if you go on the IPI Initiatives website and just scroll down, you'll see that we've put the report there. You can either scroll through it on here, or you can just open it and download it as a PDF. So there you go. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Louise, very much. Interesting, valuable, and entertaining as always. I'm going to go straight to questions, if we may, because we haven't got a lot of time.
No,
so
sorry.
If you don't mind, we'll go to questions. And we've got a couple that have come in whilst you've been talking. Abraham, could we put those up on the screen, please, if we may? Hopefully. Here we go. Oh, no, we're going to have the survey. We're going to do the survey first, are we? Let's do the survey first. Okay. Happy to do that. We've got a couple of questions we must get to. So let's do the survey then, Abraham. Let's have the first question up, see what the response was like. So have you heard of insurance-backed alliancing? Let's see what the response was. Right. So is it just the 6? Or I'm missing.
30.
I know there's more underneath. Bit of a split there, Louise.
Yeah.
Probably 50-50 split.
Yeah.
So from a marketing point of view, that's not bad for you this morning or this afternoon.
Well, I think also that's why I've probably talked at 100 miles an hour, because you kind of know that half the audience have an inkling and the other half don't. So apologies, it took a bit long, but difficult to get it all across.
Let's have the next one then. What do you think the perceived benefits are? So here we go. Project certainty, secure profits, liabilities capped. Somebody wants to know more collaborative working across the team. I'm not sure what not applicable means, or not available, or not. Anyway, spreading risk, here to discover. So obviously there's a bit of a mix. Some people think they know, others were here to listen and learn. So
nothing too surprising there. The less blame thing, it's when you watch it in action, it's fascinating. When there is no right to subrogation, when you don't have to defend your insurances, when you don't have to reach for the bottom drawer when something goes wrong, people behave differently and innovation just blossoms. Yep.
Which is what we've been trying to achieve since Egan, isn't it? Do you perceive it's competitive in price and time? So somebody needs hard comparisons, examples, concentrate on value, not lowest price. Yes. Here to discover. No. Possibly. So again, a range of responses. Some people have views, others are here to find out. So that mirror images the first question, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And if you look at that report, there are facts and figures in there about benchmarking, and we came in, I can't remember the exact figure, sort of between 50 and £100 per metre square under the normal benchmarks.
Okay, let's go on then. Do you think it's more or less risky?
Less. That's interesting. We normally get a few saying more.
Less risky.
Here to find out. Yeah. Well, hopefully I've answered some of this for those who didn't know and wanted to find out.
Interestingly, though, most people are either those that know say less, but those that don't are just here to find out. So that's interesting. And
less risky for who, Andrew, is interesting.
Because that should have been in the question, Louise. That's down to you.
Fair enough.
When do you think you should consider IBA, and when is it too late? So before design is appointed, after prelim design, concept design, as early as possible, as soon as you can. Continue going through the answers, please, Abraham. At the outset, before project inception, don't know yet. That's someone here to find out, as early as possible. So I think, again, those that know are saying as early as possible, and others that don't know are here to find out. So there you go. There's a background. That's the final question, I think, Abraham, isn't it? If so, no, I'd like to go to the questions now, if we could, please. So here we go, Louise. So cost overrun is insured. How is the delay risk covered?
The delay risk is part of the standard risks of the project, and you will have. It was a long thing. If you look at an IPI cost sheet, you will see opportunity and risk columns, and you'll see target costs, and then you'll see as the project goes, every month that project changes. The delay risk is part of the alliance risk, unless the client changes something significant and there's a review event. But mostly the team have to respond. We split the risk into cost and time, because if you were, for example, let's say on a £10 million project, you're coming in 500 grand under, there's no incentive for you to finish, is there? So obviously we have to put some incentive on the time element as well. But the team cover that risk and they do it well together. And actually the delay risk is the least thing that happens on IPI projects. We're generally coming on time and all under.
Okay, let's move on. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4 more questions, so they need to be short and sharp, Louise. How is IPI model different from a partnering contract apart from the combined added insured team?
Well, it behaves very differently. Alliance partners have shared risk. As you heard, they're all responsible for delivering different bits. They have one contract. So like if you're looking at the high level frameworks, that's just a mechanism to work together. And then under that, you've still got pretty much standard NECs, JCTs, etc. The alliance contract would actually negate the need for the framework alliance agreement, because the alliance contract does all that together.
Okay. We're going to move on because we've got to squeeze a lot in. Sorry about that. If there's only one main contractor that's delivered IPI projects so far, is there only one main contractor?
Yes, sadly. They nearly lost out on the second one, and their closest competition just got picked at the post at the very last minute. We are really, really wanting new people to do IPI all the time, and we don't want people to be put off in bidding for IPI projects, because we've got a big one coming up back in the Midlands, spring, summer. And there is nothing about having worked on an IPI project that gives you an advantage in the way we facilitate and score. So there is nothing that stops anyone coming in. Okay,
next question, please, Abraham. Why 10 mil to 50 mil projects sounds like the culture we need at all levels, and selection of partners based upon something other than price? What could that be?
Completely agree. And it's something, as you saw, I put in the very last slide, we do have a sweet spot. It is a top heavy management system. You treat the project as virtual business. We have roles within the contract, alliance manager, alliance cost manager, and things like that. They have duties and responsibilities. So we are working, in fact, we're just about to trial our first IPI Lite, and we think that we can go from probably 4 million to 10 million without significant change to the contract, and we are just doing our first one on that. And we know this is a massive area that people want to work in. I think the biggest thing I would say is we've got one client who's pestering me to death to do an IPI project, and it's a very small project they've got, but it perfectly suits our ethos because it's a community project. There are 3 clients, and we know that IPI will deliver what they want. So we will do that, and we are working on it.
Thank you. One more question, if you don't mind, folks. We're going to just dip over for a couple of minutes. Louise, issue for me is that local government procurement teams do not recognise IPI as a route to market. Now, there's a challenge.
Very true in some respects, but we've just got our first local government procurement department procuring an IPI project. They'll be the first in the country when we can officially announce. You may have seen, if you follow your bid documents and what have you, that there's something going on. It's hard because they have ingrained systems and standing orders that we're battling through, trying to get them to think differently. Intriguingly, IPI is not precluded from anywhere. That's the thing. It's in all the big frameworks, CCS, it's in those frameworks. It is listed. I think the problem sometimes is they only see it as a procurement route and not a delivery route as well. So getting their heads around how to procure to deliver an IPI project is difficult, but we are making headway. And I think once this one local authority's done it, we'll be whizzing ahead.
Well, that's good to hear, because certainly from my experience facilitating workshops and so on over 2 decades, is that one of the main obstacles is the procurement rules and regulations that local authorities have to adhere to. So, okay, thank you for that. That brings to an end the questions. There's a comment in the chat box from Steve Simmons to say reticence for EA to recommend turkeys voting for Christmas. I think that's been the same for a lot of things over the years.
Very
and
true.
Steve Green says a great presentation.
Hi, Steve.
Very, very interesting. So
we need you
now
guys
then,
to have a go at the next one.
right, we've got a few things to ask before we go. First of all, is if you want a certificate, CPD certificate of attendance, you need to go register first of all mypropass.co.uk, and then you'll automatically be sent a certificate. You open your free account, and then it all happens automatically. So that's the first thing to say. Don't forget the exit survey on Slido. If you could go to slido.com just before you go and leave us, because we'd like to hear your thoughts, please. And then next week, we're having our very first webinar based on leveling up. This is the new sort of hot topic. So we're going to be discussing leveling up, regeneration, and the role of the public sector. So if that's an interest for you, then please do join us this time next week. All it leaves me now is to, first of all, thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for tuning in. And we thank you for giving up your time. Wish you a good afternoon. Thank you to Howard and Abraham for so expertly hosting the session once again. And the biggest thank you, of course, for you, Louise, giving up of your valuable time and your experience and expertise. And certainly from a constructing excellence angle, we wish you all the best to spread the word, because it really is, if you like, a solution to what we've been trying to work on for 20 odd years in terms of a collaborative approach to integrating the supply chain lean processes. So thank you.
If anyone wants my details, Andrew, to get in touch, you're free to give my email out. So that,
okay. What we tend to do is put your presentation on the web anyway, so people can go to that. Okay. All I do now then, ladies and gents, is wish you a very pleasant afternoon. I'm off to see Kinky Boots in Yeovil tonight. So that's the start of a great weekend for me. And I'll see you all again this time next week. Thank you.